Picture yourself alone at night, tens of thousands of years ago, and a branch snaps somewhere in the dark. You don't think wind. You think something. Something with intent. Something watching. That reflex, the leap from ambiguous sound to invisible agent, might be one of the oldest habits of mind you carry. And some researchers think it's the same reflex that eventually gave you gods. You are, as far as anyone can tell, the only species that consistently believes unseen minds are shaping the world around you, not just once, not in one culture, but independently, over and over, everywhere humans have ever lived. That kind of universal pattern usually points to something built into the wiring, not something borrowed from a neighbor. So what actually put it there? Psychologist Justin Barrett has a name for the mechanism he thinks starts it: the hyperactive agency detection device, or HADD. The idea is simple. Your ancestors' minds were tuned to spot agents, predators, rivals, other people, faster than they were tuned to spot anything else, because the cost of missing a real agent was so much higher than the cost of a false alarm. Mistake a rock for a leopard, and you've wasted a second glancing over your shoulder. Mistake a leopard for a rock, and you don't get a second chance. So, the device got tuned hyperactive on purpose. Better 100 false alarms than one missed predator. That bias didn't switch off just because the branch turned out to be the wind every single time. It stayed running, scanning ambiguous shadows and unexplained sounds for intent, ready to assume somebody's there, even when nobody is. Barrett's argument is that this same restless agent-hunting habit of mind, aimed at a universe full of things nobody could fully explain, thunder, illness, drought, dreams, is what first populated the world with invisible somebodies, spirits behind the weather, ancestors behind the harvest, a mind behind the mountain. You still run the same software. It's the reason a scorch mark on a wall can look like a face if you glance at it wrong, the reason an empty house at night feels occupied even when you know it isn't. None of that proves anything supernatural is actually there. It just shows the detector firing exactly the way it was built to fire. Quick, biased toward somebody, and almost impossible to talk out of it once it's decided. That's a theory about a mechanism in your head, but the archaeological record has its own older question. When did anyone act like they believed it? Long before writing, before farming, before permanent villages, someone was already treating ordinary objects like they carried meaning beyond their obvious use. At sites in Spain, Cueva de los Aviones and Cueva Anton, archaeologist João Zilhão and his team found perforated marine shells and lumps of red and yellow pigment, some more than 100,000 years old. The shells had been pierced, likely strung and worn. The pigment had been worked, ground, prepared, and the people who left them there weren't modern humans. They were Neanderthals. That matters because for a long time the assumption was that symbolic thinking, decorating your body, marking something as special, treating color and shape as meaningful rather than just useful, arrived with us and only us. Zilhão's findings pushed that boundary back and pushed it onto a different species entirely. Whatever impulse leads a mind to paint a shell and hang it around a neck instead of just using the shell to scrape or cut, it seems it isn't unique to Homo sapiens. It may be older than Homo sapiens. Not every researcher reads that evidence the same way. A handful of critics have argued a pierced shell could occur naturally, or that ochre had a practical use, as an insect repellent or for tanning hides, with no symbolic weight attached at all. The debate hasn't fully settled, but the site dates, the deliberate grinding of the pigment, and the consistent pattern of perforation across multiple shells at multiple locations have persuaded most of the field that something more than coincidence and more than utility was going on. Painted color and pierced shells aren't proof of gods. Nobody's claiming a Neanderthal had a theology, but they are proof of something psychologically necessary first: the capacity to treat a physical object as a carrier of meaning that isn't physically there. Before you can believe an invisible mind is behind the thunder, you first need a mind capable of believing that a shell can mean something beyond being a shell. That capacity shows up remarkably early, and in a species that isn't us. Skip forward tens of thousands of years to southeastern Turkey, to a hill called Göbeklitepe. In 1994, archaeologist Klaus Schmidt started excavating a site that didn't fit anything on the existing timeline. Circular stone enclosures, T-shaped limestone pillars, some over 10 tons, carved with foxes, snakes, scorpions, vultures. dated to roughly 600 BCE, meaning it was built by hunter-gatherers, people with no farming, no domesticated animals, no permanent villages, at least according to everything researchers thought they knew about that stage of human life. Schmidt's conclusion reordered the assumptions. He argued Göbekli Tepe wasn't a settlement that happened to include religious structures. It was a monumental site built specifically for communal ritual, constructed before agriculture, before cities, before almost every institution historians used to assume had to come first. His own summary of the find became a kind of motto. First came the temple, then the city, not the other way around. Other archaeologists have since pushed back on how cleanly that motto holds. Some argue Göbeklitepe's builders may have been more settled and closer to early farming than Schmidt originally proposed, which would soften the strict temple before everything sequence into something messier and more gradual. Nobody seriously disputes what's carved into the stone, though. The pillars remain, the animals remain, and the site was clearly built for something other than daily survival. The argument now is about exactly how early and how sudden that shift really was. If Schmidt is right, that reorders more than a timeline. It suggests organized belief, the gathering, the shared ritual, the coordinated effort to haul multi-ton pillars up a hill for no practical, edible, or defensible reason wasn't a luxury civilization's built once they'd already solved food and shelter. It may have been part of what pulled scattered hunter-gatherer bands into large enough, coordinated enough groups to build permanent things together in the first place. And that's the piece that ties Barrett's mental reflex to Schmidt's stone pillars. Belief doesn't just explain the unexplainable, it organizes people. A shared invisible agent, a shared ancestor spirit, a shared God behind the hunt, gives strangers a reason to trust each other, cooperate with each other, and show up to the same hillside to move stone for a structure that will never feed them. Humans are unusually good at cooperating with people who aren't kin at a scale most other species can't manage. A belief system that everyone in the group holds in common and knows everyone else holds too is one of the more efficient glue compounds anthropologists have found for making that kind of large-scale trust possible. Evolutionary psychologist Robin Dunbar's research on social bonding points at the same ceiling from a different direction. His work suggests humans can only sustain stable, trust-based relationships with a limited number of people through direct personal contact alone. A few dozen close ties, a few hundred looser ones. Moving stone at Göbekli Tepe's scale meant coordinating with people well past that ceiling, many of them effective strangers. A shared God doesn't require you to personally know or trust the person hauling the next pillar. It only requires you to both believe the same invisible eyes are watching and the same invisible consequences apply if you don't pull your weight. So the pieces line up like this. A mind built by predation pressure to overdetect invisible agents in ambiguous situations. A species, or two, capable, tens of thousands of years earlier than expected, of treating physical objects as carriers of meaning beyond their function. And once groups grew large enough, a shared belief system sturdy enough to get unrelated people to cooperate on projects with no immediate survival payoff at all. None of this proves what's actually out there in the dark. That was never the question science can answer. What the evidence does show is why a mind like yours, built the way it was built, in the world it was built in, was always going to end up asking the question in the first place. And why? Once enough of you started asking it together, you built temples before you built cities. The branch still snaps in the dark sometimes. You still glance over your shoulder. Some habits of mind are older than any religion built on top of them, and some are exactly what built them.